In our modern world, nativism is no longer a common term, but instead a political ideal that still exists. As described by Merriam-Webster, nativism is a policy of favoring native inhabitants as opposed to immigrants. This policy is one that has existed since the beginning of immigration into the U.S. Although not all American citizens follow this, a majority did and still do. Policies and even political groups have been created as a result of it. The so-called Know-Nothing Party, which emerged in the late 1840s, was a political movement which believed in nativism. One member, Millard Fillmore, even ran for president. Although he didn't end up winning the election under this party, he won many votes, which demonstrates the popularity of nativism at this time. The group was largely created as a result of an increased arrival of Catholic Irish and German immigrants, which brought nativist sentiment, since their arrival suggested a threat to jobs and Protestant values. Although German and Irish immigrants are no longer targeted in this way, the same fears and beliefs are still present, making discrimination against certain nationalities something that still exists in America. Throughout American history, nativism has differed between time periods, the racial groups being discriminated against, and the causes that make them targeted. Currently in America, Islamophobia, or a fear of Islamic people, is very common. Following 9/11, a terrorist attack of the Twin Towers by Islamic extremists, lives of Islamic people has never been the same.
That looks like a second plane.
Muslims became the scapegoats for people's fears and other economic and social issues. Not only were they discriminated against at home through the destruction of property, hateful rhetoric on media and in politics, and difficulty finding jobs, they also received different treatment in airports and security checkpoints. As stated by Huffington Post, more Americans consider Islam to be a violent religion, a large factor as to why this discrimination exists. More recent terrorist attacks, like those in Paris and San Bernardino, increased this sentiment among Americans, even bringing it into politics. As stated by the American Civil Liberties Union, following these attacks, Congress tightened control with the visa waiver program, and later, following the presidency of Donald Trump, a Muslim ban, now being argued in U.S. courts. This February 2017 executive order shows how Muslims, just because of their race and religion, were treated as Islamic extremists. Although in this modern day, this kind of attitude is not called nativism, I believe it is directly related. Although it makes sense to fear Islamic terrorists, to take this fear and scapegoat all Islamic people suggests that nativism still exists, since this kind of scapegoating never occurs for whites. Islamic people are often distinguishable due to their dark features as well as traditional dress. To be able to visibly see a difference between Muslims and many Americans makes it possible for this discrimination to exist and prosper. This kind of discrimination towards Muslims is very similar to that of the Chinese in the 1880s. The Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned all people of Chinese descent from entering the United States, was the first time in U.S. history that immigrants weren't let in due to their race. This ban was largely due to the mass immigration of Chinese in the 1850s towards the west coast of the U.S. Many American employers at this time took advantage of the Chinese's willingness to work, often hiring Chinese over American workers in order to get cheap labor. This immigration therefore made workers worried that the Chinese would take their jobs. Given their visible and unique features, they were an easy target. NPR. Both of these acts, the Muslim ban and the Chinese Exclusion Act, single out a specific group for discrimination, and both acts were accepted because of the scapegoating which occurred, allowing a different race to take the blame for Americans' fears. Nativist values are still present today, with many Americans believing that immigrants are encroaching on American opportunities, much like they felt was happening with the Chinese in the late 1800s. The KKK in the 1920s had common nativist beliefs. These beliefs were largely due to a country struggling with the effects of industrialization, urbanization, and immigration. Issues of high crime, corruption, and poverty were common, and the scapegoat of these issues were immigrants. The KKK preached these values, strongly believing all non-Caucasians were inferior, as well as all Catholics, which were largely immigrants. Likewise, they believed the removal of immigrants would solve issues in America and bring back racial purity, which the country was founded upon. The birth of a nation, which was even shown in the White House, promoted the Ku Klux Klan and was a huge form of propaganda which increased its popularity. Like media today, which strives off people's fears and promotes many racist values, propaganda in the 1920s had the same effect. Nativism was also present during World War II for the Japanese. After the Japanese attack of Pearl Harbor, all Japanese Americans were under the forced relocation into internment camps. They were blamed for the bombing and were told that this relocation was for their own benefit. As stated by the GL Institute of American History, many workers and businessmen who competed with Japanese for jobs, as well as local politicians, were supporters of this removal policy. Ironically, in Hawaii, with a large Japanese population, very few Japanese were relocated. This suggests how the mass internment of Japanese on the West Coast was not for safety reasons, but actually due to racist values and beliefs. As was later stated in the publication Personal Justice Denied, not a single documented act of espionage, sabotage, or fifth column activity was committed by an American citizen of Japanese ancestry or by a resident Japanese alien on the West Coast. This mass relocation reflects Nativist values. There is no reasoning nor proof behind their actions against the Japanese. Instead, it was a result of racially motivated and fear-based beliefs held against non-Americans at the time when competition for jobs was high. No German or Italian citizens were detained in this way, even though they too were fighting against the U.S. The recognizable features of the Japanese and Chinese, much like those of Muslim immigrants today, made them an easy and obvious nativist target. As shown, although the racial groups have changed throughout the years, nativism still exists, especially to those who look obviously different than most Americans. Social and political issues such as wars, World War II for the case of Japanese, and the War on Terror for that of Muslims, bring to light a fear which, along with pre-existing nativist values, target these immigrants. Likewise, when America is struggling with poverty, such as when the Ku Klux Klan existed in the 1920s and why the Chinese Exclusion Act was created in the 1850s, the easiest targets become those that are or look foreign.